War on the streets of Europe.
That's a lot of gunfire. Okay, let's go. Get in the car!
This is the battle for our survival and our existence.
People living in fear.
It feels really like really dark hours.
The Ukrainians are fighting back.
They have demonstrated a remarkable courage in the face of naked aggression.
There are questions about Vladimir Putin's state of mind.
A simple answer would be to say that he's mad, and there may be some truth to it.
What he does next could change the fate of millions.
We really need to show the Russian people his real face, the face of a monster.
Within hours of Vladimir Putin ordering his forces to invade Ukraine, my colleague Paul Kenyon witnesses one of the first battles of the war.
So what's happened here?
Ну, я так понимаю, что прилетели вертолеты и захватили аэропорт. Говорят, что уже шли наши гвардейцы эти, и уже, то есть, как бы аэропорт захвачен, нам сказали.
And we just heard from some locals who've been just crouching down because there's been a lot of gunfire, that they're Russian soldiers, that the Russians have taken over this airport, which is just on the outskirts of Kiev.
Hostomel Airport, 20 kilometers north of Kyiv. For the Russians, it's a strategically important staging post for an assault on the capital.
This guy's got a gun in front of him. Is he filming it? Is he pulling his moves? He says get out.
Мы из BBC, телевидение BBC, можно говорить?
Yeah.
Okay, sure.
There's a Russian. We had to dip the camera then beneath the dashboard, and those soldiers told us to get away. They pointed the guns at us, but just as we were going, we noticed that they didn't seem to have...
Among the first troops on the ground in Putin's push for Kyiv. They thought the Ukrainians would be a pushover. They were wrong.
That's gunfire again, isn't it? It's not where we just were, otherwise it would have been much louder.
Video posted online shows the Ukrainian counterattack. One of the helicopters flies right over the Panorama team.
Here comes the helicopter, here comes the helicopter. Here comes the helicopter, yeah. Okay, let's go. Get in the car! Great!
Да мы задержались тут разговор, поэтому мы...
Though the Ukrainians retook the airport, since then it's fallen back into Russian hands. This is Kyiv, historic capital of Ukraine, home to almost 3 million people. The start of a war Ukrainians had hoped would never happen. As the sirens wail, people pack their bags and head to the city's underground to take shelter. Asia and Vasya are civil servants.
Hello?
They've left their apartment for an underground car park.
We run down to the shelter and we spend majority of our time. And this is actually our reality now, expecting what will happen and hoping for that life will be normal again.
I guess no one can understand what is the red line for the Russia. What what they would like to, where they would like to stop, what is the worst case scenario. Third World War, I don't know.
Putin chose this war, and now he and his country will bear the consequences.
This hideous and barbaric venture of Vladimir Putin must end in failure.
Signs that Russia was building up to an invasion emerged last November. Satellite images showing tens of thousands of Russian troops and tanks massing along Ukraine's borders. Putin said it was a giant maid.
All the indicators were there that this was presaging an invasion. I'm not sure we knew or assumed that it would be quite on the scale that it appears to be at the moment. I think the options at that stage ranged from, well, perhaps he could do nothing, perhaps he could save a rattle and back off, perhaps, worst case, he could go for broke.
Sergei Markov is a former Russian MP and Kremlin insider.
As I understand, this decision had been made by Vladimir Putin something about in October of last year to use a Russian army for the liberation of Ukraine.
So when he lied and said he had no intention to invade Ukraine?
He didn't lie. Vladimir Putin never lied. When he may use military disinformation of enemies of Russia, it's not lie. It's ultra super truth.
Vladimir Putin is concerned about Russia's security. After the fall of the Soviet Union, some of his Eastern European neighbors have chosen to join NATO, the West's military alliance.
I do not blame the Ukrainians one little bit for pushing for NATO membership, because if you're Ukrainian and you've got Russia sitting on your borders, led by an autocrat like Putin, who has talked about Kiev being the mother of all Russian cities.
Putin feared Ukraine, Russia's closest neighbor, would join NATO and demanded it never should.
He has to close this bloody dark hole as Ukraine. So it's his goal to create more security for Russia. And you may know that from Russian history, we have big feeling of the threat from the West.
With Putin's forces surrounding Ukraine, a succession of Western politicians went to Moscow, trying to avert war.
Fundamentally, a war in Ukraine would be disastrous.
Последний раз, я думаю, была...
Diplomacy didn't stop Putin. He declared 2 pro-Russian areas of eastern Ukraine independent states. The West imposed economic sanctions, widely criticized as being too weak.
The West responded with what can only be described as a pea shooter. I mean, those sanctions were completely pointless, and in a way that will probably embolden Putin.
At 5 a.m. last Thursday, Russian forces crossed Ukraine's borders, from the north, the east and the south. Images of the invasion started to emerge. Snatched video of a tank crushing a car. A plane shot down over Kyiv. And an apartment building hit by a missile, killing 2. The Ukrainian government went to ground, but stayed in the city. Thank you very much, Olha, for making it to speak to us. We know life is very, very difficult for you. From a secret location, one of Ukraine's deputy prime ministers spoke to me.
Armed forces of Russian Federation deploy another groups and battalions in an enormous quantity. It's like thousands and thousands of soldiers and tanks which are going to our territories. We have shelling directly in the capital of Ukraine. in the streets of Ukraine. A lot of civilians suffer.
Families began to flee, many heading west away from the fighting.
Second day of invasion.
Ksenia, a business manager, lives in Odessa, home to Ukraine's navy.
The entire city was wakened by a series of blasts, so those were heard all over the city. And obviously it was quite clear that something was happening. Like it's nothing you can compare it to. Pain, it's despair, it's fear, it's the entire range of emotions, and people can't really sleep just because it's this fear. Then when you wake up, things are going to get drastically worse.
Life on Putin's doorstep has become ever more dangerous over the past decade. This was the center of Kyiv in 2014. Demonstrations on Maidan Square overthrew the pro-Russian government. Putin feared Ukraine was moving closer to Europe. Mystery People here blamed Russia. Then Putin seized Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula, moving in by stealth.
We saw the unmarked vehicles. We saw the soldiers in uniform without insignia, faces covered with balaclavas, and it was very obvious what was happening. And it was a very professional, sophisticated operation.
My colleague Paul was in Crimea for Panorama when Putin's supporters took over.
There's a warning shot.
Who are you?
Go on. Go on. Please go on.
We should go on, because it's actually quite a tense situation here. You can see this is a Russian-controlled area now.
Pro-Moscow separatists also seized Russian-speaking parts of eastern Ukraine.
Vladimir Putin respects Ukraine. He just told that Ukraine has been part of the Russia during many centuries. And Ukrainian people, they speak Russian language. People in Ukraine has millions of connections with Russian people. People in Ukraine wants to be friends with Russia.
Fighting in eastern Ukraine has continued for 8 years. Around 14,000 people have been killed.
The world watched. There was talk of sanctions, there were even a few sanctions, but the reality was that they were so minor that they didn't change the calculus for anyone, certainly not for President Putin. And he saw it in many ways as an encouragement, a green light to carry on.
Last year, Putin gave the clearest signal yet of his desire to expand Russia further.
Мы утратили, я уже говорил, там 30-40% территории, превратились в другую страну совершенно. И то, что нарабатывалось в течение тысячи лет, в значительной степени было утрачено.
So that's what Putin's thinking. He wants to re-establish a Russian empire. It's absolutely an indicator of Putin's state of mind and his thinking. And this dressing up in a historical context to give it greater resonance and credibility with.
To hear a world leader devote a big part of his speech to, the events that happened decades or centuries ago is really strange.
What does it tell us about Putin's state of mind?
A simple answer would be to say that he's mad, and there may be some truth to it.
I am looking today at a different Putin from the man that I dealt with. He was cold, he was calculating. You knew you were dealing with a rational actor who would, as I say, take risks, but not completely unquantifiable risks. We're now looking at a man who seems to be driven more by ideology and who seems to be, unstoppably so far, committed to this mad adventure.
Throughout the pandemic, President Putin kept himself in virtual isolation.
We've seen Putin over the last 2 years increasingly withdraw from everyone, including his own inner circle. I think he's grown more and more paranoid the longer that he's been in power. It's clear that he's always had a chip on his shoulder, this kind of sense of humiliation and grievance since the Soviet collapse.
Putin's now deployed more than 150,000 troops as part of his plan to restore Russia to its former glory. He said he wanted to demilitarize Ukraine and drive out what he called its neo-Nazi government.
It's a pretty extraordinary claim to make about a state that has a president and a prime minister, both of whom are Jewish.
Why was that language being used by Putin and his circle?
Well, it's a classic piece of KGB disinformation. It's an attempt to label your enemy as something unacceptable.
This is the man facing down Putin, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. A former comic actor, he'd only been a politician for 3 years.
Президент тут. Всі ми тут. Наші військові тут. Громадяни суспільства тут. Всі ми тут. Захищаємо нашу незалежність, нашу державу. І так буде й далі.
Ukrainians have answered their president's call to resist.
Oh, well done, Svatoslav.
26-year-old MP Svatoslav Yurash is organizing volunteers.
I'm at the moment trying to get more weapons. Various people who are appealing to me to try and join the fight. And the point here is that we are giving everybody who wants to defend Ukraine a chance to do it. The battle for our survival and our existence. So we have no other choice. We are bringing everyone to the fight because this is a fight for our very existence.
A recruiting station in Kyiv where residents are signing up.
So tell me, are you normally a military person, or are you just signing up today?
No, I am a lawyer.
You're a lawyer?
Lawyer.
Безумовно, це невідворотньо, і нам прийдеться вступити в бій для того, щоб захистити свій рідний Київ, свою Україну і звільнити цю територію від російських ворогів.
How do you feel wearing these and carrying an AK-47?
It's not normal for me. But I needed it. It's my country.
Do you know how to
it's my duty.
Do you know how to use this?
No. But I will be used.
Are you nervous?
A little bit. It's normal.
What?
We must go.
Yeah, you go. Hey, I've been incredibly impressed by the coverage of ordinary Ukrainians, of Ukrainian border guards, of Ukrainian soldiers who have stood and fought.
The Ukrainians are pretty well equipped, they're pretty well organized, and they know how to fight. And they're fighting for their homeland, and they will be inspired by a desire to get at the Russians for violating the sanctity of Ukraine, and rightly so.
Since the invasion, countries around the world have announced further economic sanctions, biting deeper. They've targeted oligarchs, banks, and Russia's international trade.
The state banks that have been sanctioned by both the US and the UK and the EU are really integral to the Russian economy. We're already seeing a run on the banks. People are queuing to change money and to take out their deposits. So Putin is really facing a backlash which he's never experienced before.
Sanctions are a blunt instrument. It's not a silver bullet that changes behaviors of dictators such as Putin. But I think these sanctions, they do decrease support for Putin among his close and wider circle.
It will affect Putin, but you may know the Russian history. More pressure against Russia, more stronger Russian response. So more sanctions, your sanction against Russia, more Russian people support Vladimir Putin.
Russia's invasion has now caused more than
9 hours in the traffic jam leading to the border.
Ksenia is one of them. She's now at the Moldovan border.
A brisk 15-minute walk and finally I'm at the border. Checkpoint Palanka. As you can see, lots of people trying to cross it on foot.
The next day, she makes it across Moldova to safety in Romania.
There is nothing really to celebrate, and it's not like we can say that we're happy or even, pleased, just because every single one of us had to leave someone behind.
In Kyiv, with the situation deteriorating, Asya and Vasia prepare to leave too.
We at home for 10-15 minutes to get some food and packed some extra stuff.
At dawn, they head out of the capital.
I felt such a panic attack. They might bomb me given your house and you're gonna die. So we decided that even if it's could be dangerous, we should leave, and we should try to move somewhere where it's less dangerous.
Putin's forces are moving closer to Kyiv. With fears about Russian spies and saboteurs, civilians are banned from the streets. A citywide curfew is imposed.
It's just a few minutes before the curfew, which is 11 o'clock. Look at it. This is the Maidan. Completely empty. Somebody's just come into my hotel room and said that every light has to be off in the rooms in case they're spotted by Russian planes through the windows looking for targets. We are allowed to use very dim torches, so if I can just put this on. Right, hang on. And get over to the window. I'm not going to shine the torch through the window. But let's see what we can see. And it is almost complete darkness out there. Everybody obediently and with some fear switching their lights off.
Kyiv remains tense, but relatively quiet. 300 miles east, street battles break out in Kharkiv, Ukraine's second city. Continued there today. Putin has made it clear, if Western troops enter Ukraine to join the fight, there'll be serious repercussions.
Ответ России будет незамедлительным и приведет вас к таким последствиям, с которыми вы в своей истории еще никогда не сталкивались.
NATO should not and cannot put any form of military force into Ukraine, into this fight, or into the air above it, because that would absolutely guarantee the Third World War.
Even without NATO boots on the ground, yesterday Putin took the rhetoric up a notch. Facing growing international support for Ukraine, he put his nuclear arsenal on alert.
This is really another insane part of it. We have a leader of a major nuclear country alluding in his public speeches to potential use of these devastating weapons. There's no... it's difficult to get your head around this.
5 days of war, and thousands have been killed. Despite Russia's overwhelming firepower, their progress appears to be slow.
The reality is this is a man who thought that he would invade Ukraine in a day, change the government and go home as a conquering hero. That clearly hasn't happened.
The invasion of Ukraine has triggered outrage around the world. Putin may try to ignore that, but in Russia, dissent is growing, and that's harder for him to ignore.
If the Russians succeed, Putin at that point will become a great national hero. If, however, the situation you're left with afterwards goes badly wrong, then it could be very problematic indeed for Mr. Putin.
Tonight, Ukrainians all over the country will be sleeping in basements and makeshift bunkers while their army tries to repel the Russian invaders. Peace talks have begun, but few believe there'll be a swift end to this conflict with Putin.
We will hold on until Russians will withdraw, as long as it will take. We really need to show Russian people his real face, the face of a monster.